This presentation, I'll be using we, not I, because this presentation is in some ways a bit of an experiment for us because we've actually been studying Russia together for 25 to 30 years. And before that, even more. And we did this through an exchange program with Kazan State University. And from 1990 to about 2005, we took 4 major trips there with students to study the ecology of the middle basin of the Volga River, sponsored by this university. Nina was very much a part of helping that whole thing happen again and again. She has a lot of stories that she could probably tell about all the difficulties. What's that? Cyber attack from Russia. We have done this thing together from the very beginning of research, the trips that we've taken, and I'm now writing a book, perhaps my last book, on all the trips that we did take to Russia, to Lake Baikal and to the middle basin of the Volga River to study the ecology of that period. And we're still in contact with that. In fact, we have many friends in the Kazan area, and we have a kind of Russian son that came here, sponsored by us, who goes back and forth. And what's interesting about him is he's not only Russian, but he's Tatar. And I'm going to say something, and Nina's going to say something about Tatarstan and the people of Tatarstan in the course of our presentation. So, what are we going to do? I'm going to talk for a bit about Russia as a petrostate that's very similar to other petrostates, particularly in the Near East. I want to talk about Russia's major customer and also Russia's major ally, and how the oil and gas is very much a part of the Chinese-Russian alliance. I want to talk a bit about the Ukraine, and again, I'm going to focus on the oil and as Putin once said, oil is power and power is oil. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. And Nina is going to talk about that as well with respect to global warming. So she will then speak about Putin and global warming based on maybe thousands of conversations she and I have had about this. And Tatarstan as a petrostate within a petrostate. And then some conclusions about what it means to be a petrostate and what are the geopolitics of a petrostate. I'm not going to say much about the current war, except maybe in a footnote. So, probably the world's leading expert, in my opinion, certainly, on the battle for oil and power in Russia and the battle for oil and power in the world is Thane Gustafson, who is a professor of government at Georgetown University. And he's styled petrostates, which are not just about Russia, but other petrostates and their similarities in the following fashion. The classic petrostate is one in which either foreign oil companies or a dominant state-owned oil company and parasitic ruling elites jointly control the hydrocarbon revenues with little benefit to the local populations. It is an enormous operation the two things that Russia has mostly to sell is oil and gas. Not manufacturers. They produce very little that anyone in the way of manufacturing. In fact, most of their cars come from Korea and from China. So here's the stretch of it. But if you will, look sort of to the left around Moscow, and if I can bring it right, Moscow there, and here is the middle basin of the Volga River. And as you can see, it's clumped there because that is the major Russian industrial heartland based on oil and gas. And I'll talk much about that in the course of my presentation, and Nina will as well. And then gas. It is a gas and oil-rich country, all the way from Moscow to Vladivostok, and they're still finding areas. And what's not on this particular one, look to the north, is that passage that's opening up now as a result of global warming at the top, the Arctic Passage. And it's one thing that Russia feels very good about global warming, is that's opening up, but that's going to pose security problems for us and the Western world. But that's another lecture altogether. So what is the anatomy of a petrostate? And what I'm saying mostly about Russia. Often 60%, with Russia it's 48% or more of exports are oil and gas, leading to limited economic diversification. What I mean here is that a petrostate puts most of their money into oil and gas and essentially starves other economic groups. The political power of the petrostate is usually a small elite which concentrates power and with an authoritarian leadership, with weak democratic institutions and lack of accountability. Now, the corruption is beyond understanding in some cases, but Russians have a better way to put that than I do, but I won't. So there's a kind of revenue model of all of these petrostates that fits Russia as well. The government relies on external oil sales rather than taxing the citizenry. It breaks social contract and accountability between rulers and rule because they do it without any permission whatsoever through votes or any kind of organization. So, then again, I would say the social and political dynamics are filled with widespread corruption, patronage, and good old boyism. The use of oil wealth to suppress opposition is used in almost all of the petrostates, but certainly in Russia. But it has a great vulnerability, a very great vulnerability, and all petrostates have this, and that's the price of a barrel of oil. Extreme risk during price drops, and we see this going on now. Because on the other side, it's an extreme benefit when the price of oil goes up. So oil and gas then, and the price of oil and gas is what really provides the economic and the political economic basis of this particular petrostate, Russia. So let me talk a little bit about how that came about. And this is a very intelligent audience, I know, and I don't have to remind you that the Russian government is not a communist government. People still ask me that when I talk about Russia. It's a form of state capitalism. It's a form, I would say, of state capitalism. It's capitalism in the sense as you have large oligarchical families and businesses, particularly in oil and gas, but it's run by the state ultimately, and not by the company necessarily. And I'll say more about that in a few minutes. Now, the person who gained control of that is Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. And I want to talk a little bit about what he got in control in and how. A little bit about his protection of oligarchs and the insurance that he gives them about deals and the support. His support is absolutely necessary for any combination of the oligarchs. Okay, so Russia is a confederated economy, confederated it's a constitutional democracy based on federal principles and some provincial prison. But look at the scheme. When I say he took control of all the boxes, now again, this happened over a period of 10 to 15 years, not all of a sudden. But he built on every victory over any advocate against him for power. He built as he went along and had to deal with opposition, but the opposition was not from the people. It was largely from the oligarchs and from the bureaucracy. So as president from 2000 to 2008, he more or less gained control of the whole government by, first of all, taming the electoral part of the whole system, the State Duma and the Federation Council, by controlling the parties there very cleverly, and building his own party, United Russia, which is the strongest party now in Russia. And actually, the communists, what there was, joined in the Federation, his party. So I would say about 2004, he has complete control, really, of the legislative part of. And what that means, in a sense, is that he appoints the prime minister of the government. He okays the ministers underneath the prime minister, and he sets the agenda for the council of ministers. So bit by bit, in other words, he gained control of every major sluice of power, both local and the federated government as a whole. Sort of to centralize, let me just say this is a summary of that. Putin's centralization of power in Russia from the 2000 to the present. Putin gained and maintained extensive control over governmental institutions, shaping all policies and decision-making processes between 2000 and 2010. Through key positions and appointments, particularly for the bureaucracy, Putin influenced various levels of government and political entities. He is brilliant at divide and rule. Divide your enemies and then rule. This centralization affected decision-making, policy implication, and implementation, and the political landscape of Russia's federal government and economy. But he didn't do that all of a sudden. Let me give you one example. When he came to power, there were still very strong oligarchs from the Yeltsin era, and the strongest of those oligarchs was Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the imprisoned former head of Yukos oil company he would be. Khodorkovsky challenged Putin on oil and gas policy. He had the largest oil and gas company in the world. He's probably the richest man in the world at one particular time. Between 2000 and 2008, Putin gained full power, in other words, over the economy by disciplining oligarchs and crushing oppositions within the bureaucracy to his policies. After this, Putin acts as referee between conflicting oligarchs and ambitious bureaucrats. He just has this sense of fear when somebody is getting too close and beginning to act on independence. And that person would be then isolated and eventually end up in the courts for corruption. He's done the same thing that Xi Jinping has done. He's used the whole notion of corruption to take care of many of his political enemies. So, emerging out of that are these titans that have more to do with the price of oil and gas on the world market than anybody I can think of. There were, I would say, as late as 2000, maybe 5, there were 6 or 7 now major oil and gas company. What Putin tried to do then, and did eventually, was to focus most of the power in this particular area into the CEO of Rosneft, Igor Sechin. Igor Sechin was a former KGB, and he was part of the Petersburg gang. He was part of the Petersburg politics during the Yeltsin period, and closely associated with Putin when Putin moved from St. Petersburg to work with the Yeltsin government. He is now the CEO of Rosneft. He more or less controls every major decision made about oil in Russia. And all of the other companies go along. They have no other choice. He is part, really, of what I would call Putin's kitchen cabinet, particularly on oil and gas. Next to him is a very powerful oligarch as well, Alexei Miller, but he came in a different way into this office, Gazprom. Gazprom is the largest gas producing and the largest gas company, really, in the world. And all gas decisions that are made in Russia are made essentially by Alexei Miller in short cabinet with Igor Sechin and with Putin. Well, so what? How does it work in geopolitics? Let me use the Chinese-Russian alliance as an example about how gas and oil is vital in the geopolitics of Asia, Eurasia, and in general. I love this picture. I love it because of Putin's never-failing, shit-eating smile. That's a Southern term. I apologize to the ladies. Well, Alexei Miller on the left, and Xi Jinping on the right, who is no kin to Xi Jinping, by the way, have signed a $400 billion gas deal. That's the first one in 2014. There have been many since then. So China is the major customer for oil and gas and for all other natural resources in Siberia, out of Siberia. And you get some sense of how this is laced together by the oil and gas pipelines from Russia, primarily out of Siberia, into China. Love this picture. There he is, man on the spot, Putin, Russian pipelines to China. I would argue that the Russian pipelines to China and the Chinese alliance, aside from its geopolitical strength that it gives them both, and I might say something about that at the end if we have time, on what's happening in the Middle East now and how they respond to that. So, the war in Ukraine. One of the NATO leaders noted that NATO expansion is not the sole reason Russia is keen on Ukraine. Ukraine has the third largest known gas reserves in Europe, valued at 1.09 trillion cubic meters or billions of meters. You can see that in yellow here. What you can't see in this map is extremely important of understanding why Putin, in my estimation, invaded Ukraine. It's about gas and oil. Because, as some of you may recall, before 2014, in 2008, when they took the Crimea, they had been arguing back and forth between Putin and the president of the Ukraine about the rent that would be used by the Ukrainians and their sources of gas and oil and what they would do for it. Putin wanted to control that. So look at these pipelines of power as I put them on the left side. These are the essential pipelines between Russia and much of Europe. And it's owned by the Ukrainians, not by Russia. They argued continuously over that, threatened each other politically over that. And if you look at this other map, it gives you an even better sense of the larger picture. Ukraine is here, as you can see. It is really the key to gas, oil distribution throughout this area. So my argument is it was time to deal with that to make it part of the Russian Empire, and then say it's largely because we fear NATO. Now, they do feel NATO. There's no question about that, and I think it was a terrible mistake in the 1990s to push NATO right up to Belarus and Russia. It was, I think, a mistake. Well, I hope this will be controversial to some of you. There they are. Let's make the world great again, together. That's not a joke. Trump has admired Putin for 2 decades and envies his dictatorial power. I don't think anybody. I've been tracking these two, by the way, for 25 years, so it's good to see them on this wanted poster here. Trump clearly favors Putin in peace negotiations regarding the Ukraine war. He has cut off essentially all of the weaponry from the United States, and proud about it. He's enjoyed Putin's support in form of cyber attacks in American elections and all sorts of other ways that through the internet he's influenced the United States. He favors lifting sanctions on Putin and other oligarchs. And he has recently, and saying it's because of the get the oil prices down, and he has lifted the sanction on Putin on supplying oil to India and other sanctions. And within the next, I would say, 2 weeks, I would expect him to knock down all of the sanctions on Putin. There's one person that has followed probably Putin and Trump and their conversations. John R. Bolton, for a while an advisor to Trump, was a geopolitical strategist. And he said he just doesn't know enough to not get played. He wants to get along. He thinks he's friends with Putin. Putin does not think he's friends with him, and Putin is damn sight smarter. And the final, I think, insult, as far as I'm concerned, is Trump has not recognized or criticized Russia for giving intelligence and locations of U.S. and affiliated bases to Iran. And it goes on now still. Putin has an ally, and he has used him well. So, may I introduce my wife, partner, and colleague, Nina Carter.
Thank you, Tom. I think I need to turn off your microphone, or maybe not. Maybe I think it'll work, both of us. Okay. So, the next area that we wanted to talk about, which might be a little bit new to some, is climate change. The reason for that, as Tom said earlier, is all of these trips that we've taken, and what's the information we learned, what are the things we observed. So this is a picture of polar bears trying to find something to eat in a garbage dump in Siberia. And those are massive forest fires throughout the Siberian forests. And there are many, many more pictures, but I didn't want to put all of them up here because it would just be too depressing. So let's talk about the pros and cons of climate change for Russia. Whoever is in charge of Russia, they're going to be affected by climate change, regardless of who's the ruler. The benefits, though, to Russia is that they will rely on hydrocarbon, oil and gas sales, and that is a profit for them. That funds their government, and it funds their programs for the population. Also, warming increases the extent of arable land, agricultural land, there'll be more of it. As you know, they're to the north of us, so this will all be good news for them. It also opens a new year-round Arctic sea route. Remember Tom said those gas and oil pipelines, Verkuta, which is in the northern part where the natural gas is, that will be accessible by ships much more easily than it is now. And this harsh climate in Russia will be more tolerable, more livable. Now, the losses for them is that they are the largest country that is warming faster than the rest of the Earth because it's so far north. So they're warming faster than we are here. And because they're still doing this carbon-intensive Ukraine war, it's exacerbating the climate change and all the emissions that are being put into the air every time they shoot a missile or blow up something. So this is a Moscow University in the distant past. This is a bit in the distant part over there, a power plant. So the changes, the climate change effects that are happening now, heat waves, especially in Moscow, because it's a city of, I don't know, 12, 14 million people with massive amounts of concrete and massive amounts of heat sinks. So they're feeling the effect. Water stress on agriculture and river levels, forest fires impacting the forest that I showed you a picture of, and also other ecosystems. Permafrost degradation. When the permafrost starts to melt, people's houses fall into these giant sinkholes. Also, there's extreme precipitation, that is flash floods that are destroying infrastructure and people, as well as the last thing, which we might not think about, are permafrosts. As it melts, it releases methane, which exacerbates climate change again. So, and there are a couple of pictures. I have to keep moving this little box around. This is a heat wave on the Volga River. These young women are walking around like this in March. They're supposed to be wearing fur coats and boots. That's March. This is the permafrost melting in Siberia, and one of the many, many buildings and entire villages that are sinking. We don't always see this on the news very much. So here are several maps. And I want to point out that, did you know there are 11 time zones in Russia? If you start way over there and you come way over here, that's 11 time zones. It took us flying from Moscow, which is way over there, to Irkutsk, which is on Lake Baikal, 8 hours. 8-hour flight. Maybe I can show it here. Moscow is about here. We had an 8-hour flight to here. So this is a huge country, and look at the forest fires, red, dark red. Look at the permafrost melting, dark blue. Look at where the heat stress, and again, here in the middle, where's my little pointer? And right in here is Moscow. There's Moscow, heat stress. This is also in the southern part, which is having heat stress, and it's droughts. The drought and the heat stress areas where their agricultural land is now. So they're seeing droughts already. Much are here. But let's look at the attitudes about climate change. I'll get this little guy out of the way. So what are they thinking? Trump denies climate change and is trying to build a petro empire, not state empire, with his connections throughout the world. Putin acknowledges climate change, but finds some of its impacts positive. And then Xi Jinping fully recognizes it, enjoys profits from green industry, and is a pioneer in energy transition to renewables. They are producing solar panels and wind turbines and battery backup systems and new technology much faster than anywhere else in the world. And a reminder though, they still depend on oil and gas during this energy transition period, but they're moving much faster than the rest of the world, or I should say at least the United States. So the dilemma that faces petrostates, and in Russia in particular, this book is extremely important. Daniel Yergin, he's written another book that came out about 20 years ago called The Prize, and it's an excellent several TV series, part series on TV's The Prize, about the history of oil throughout the world. This one, he focuses on energy, climate, and the clash of nations. And he says that Russia's climate doctrine reflects a fundamental tension and dilemma in Russia's climate policy. Russia is trying to balance international climate commitments with an economy heavily dependent on hydrocarbon exports, which constitutes a major portion of its federal revenues. So that's Daniel Yergin's statement. And let me get over here. Maybe that will do it. Okay, Mr. Tech Support. Can I have help in moving this slide along? Why is it? I gotta use my arrows. This, nope. Did I do something wrong? There we go. Yeah, back to. No, no, no. Oh, where are you going? You're ruining my slideshow. The beginning. We gotta go. No, 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 no. He ruined everything. No. Oh, geez. Is this working now? Is this
working?
okay? Now it's working. Okay, got a preview where we're going. Tatarstan. Okay, Trump and this. Where'd it go? All right, I'm just going to go here. So this is the contradictory problems with Russia or a petrostate. In 2002, Putin moved all the major environmental agencies under the Ministry of Natural Resources. That's over almost 25 years ago. He said, take the Department of Environmental Protection and put it under a natural resource agency. That would be like us saying, we're going to take EPA and Washington's Department of Ecology, and we're going to put it under a Ministry of Mining and Resource Extraction. So that's what they did in 2000, what he did in 2002. Then he did push Russia into the Kyoto Agreement, but for geopolitical reasons, he wanted a seat at the table. He wanted a seat at the international negotiations and influence over the decisions. And I think I just solved this problem. Here we go. In 2019, he did ratify the Paris Agreement over the objections of the Duma because they didn't want to comply. But he said, no, 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 we're going to ratify it. And we're going to base our climate policies on forest carbon sequestration only and not change any of our oil, gas, and industrial policies. So he said, we're going to have carbon sinks in our forests, but he failed to mention, and they're burning. So that was kind of a dilemma and a contradiction. And so here it is again. He announced his commitment to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, but his strategy relies on this forest carbon sequestration. And climate scientists have criticized this policy as unfounded. And the last part here, when he updated his doctrine, a carbon doctrine in 23, they removed fossil fuels as the driving force of climate change. And they promise that technology will be found to solve everything. So that's what Russia's actual climate policy is. This is a map of all of the petrostates, and unfortunately the Zoom thing gets that cut off. You can see Russia at the top. These are petrostates around the world, and they have this fundamental contradiction that is an economy based on fossil fuels is not going to be able to meet their climate commitments or even deal with climate. And all petrostates face this. So let's, in our last bit, turn to Tatarstan, which is a case study. It's a petrostate within a petrostate. Tatarstan is a prosperous, industrial, resource-rich republic within Russia. 4 million people live there. Half of the, almost little less than half, are Tatar, Sunni Muslim. Sunni Muslims are Saudi Arabia, UAE, around the Gulf. Iran is Shia, different Muslim. 47% are Russian Orthodox. Only 5% are another two groups of people that are mostly Muslim. And these are descendants from, as Tom put this in there, he said, they have to know they come from Batu Khan's Mongol horde. So this was back in the 14th and 15th century that they came. Oh, don't shake your head now, sorry. But anyway, they come from a long line of Mongols that came from over here, China, Mongolia, and came all the way over to create Tatars.
Batu Khan was Genghis Khan's grandson.
Hey, just so you know.
Batu Khan conquered Russia. And
it's got to Vienna, I understand. So here we are, Tatarstan. The capital of Tatarstan is Kazan, and it dates back to the 15th century, the city, 500 miles southeast of Moscow. It's one of the wealthiest cities in Russia, and it has a population of just over 1 million people, and it's on the confluence of two rivers, the Kanzaka and the Volga. And also, Tom wants me to point out This is the Kremlin. There's always a Kremlin in a major city. These are the government offices. That is the church, Orthodox Church. And the building that looks like a mosque is a mosque. And it was not there in 1990 when we first went. It has since been built by Saudi Arabian money, which our son Timur helped get. So anyway, that's the mosque. There's the Orthodox Church. And this is the government offices, the Kremlin. Urban life in Kazan, downtown shopping street, Bauman Avenue. Also suburbs with little markets and apartment buildings. 1 million people in the city. It's sort of the size of Seattle. In the country, however, there are beautiful parks, lakes, river, Volga River. There are villages with dirt roads. Not all of them are paved. Not everyone has electricity. Not everyone has running water. We used outhouses and buckets for water for many of our trips. So gas, oil, power in Tatarstan, because it is one of the richest industrial gas and oil resources. In 1990, with the fall of the Soviet Union, the Tatar government officials took over their resources. They took over their government. It was very positive. Everybody was looking up to a new day of independent republic. But by 2009, Putin reasserted his federal control of the government and the oil and the gas industry, as Tom mentioned. And these three fellows here, Putin, Minikhov, and Shaimaev, on the left there, those are former and present presidents of Tatarstan signing an agreement with Putin in 2019. One of the major gas companies in Russia is Tatneft, and it is headquartered in Tatarstan, and they are a major Russian company that is vertically integrated from drilling and pumping to storage to gas stations. And I just looked online to see they're expanding now into Uzbekistan. So they're huge. And just so you can keep the connection of Muslim leaders, just in 2014, the Mini Khanov from Tatarstan was meeting with the United Arab Emirates president, Al Zahid Al Nahyan. Maybe someone can help pronounce that. Good, thank you. And they were just talking about oil transfers and oil deals between United Arab Emirates and Tatarstan and Russia. So, very briefly, some pictures of our trip and findings that we made. This is Tom and John Baldridge, whose dad, Bill, is here in the back of the room. This was our 2016 trip with two of our Russian field ecologists. And we are taking the train from Moscow to Kazan. And this woman right here is the one that sends you your emails every month about your OWAC. Raise your hand, Mary. So, so this was our beginning of our trip. And then we would go to nature preserves called Zapovedniki. And these are not parks. These are supposed to be nature preserves set aside for research and conservation. And this one in particular was a botanical garden. You can read the word America. This was a whole section that they planted with Doug fir, madronas, huckleberries, all of our plants. And then they had Europe and they had Asia and so on. But it was a botanical garden, and these trips were led by Professor of Ecology Tatiana Rogova to these various nature preserves so we could see what's going on the ground. And I'll tell you, when we went to some of these, there was one that had an enormous industrial chicken processing farm in the middle of it. And we asked Tatiana, so what's with the nature preserve and the farm? And she said, somebody knows somebody that knows somebody. So it knows somebody. So we just don't ask. And it just was that. And that's the answer you would get about how did they get the permit? Was there a permit, et cetera? So what we found is that, as I just said, politics drove implementation of environmental protection In 1990, again, as Tatarstan was opening up, scientists, including Tatiana Rogova from the Kazan State University, proposed policies and laws to address environmental problems. By the late 1990s, Tatarstan government even adopted laws with Yeltsin's encouragement. But by 2000, Putin said, no, we're just not going to enforce those anymore, as observed by our students and our faculty. So for example, sorry, you can't read the top there, Tatarstan Ministry of Forestry and Environment, we went to see him. He gave this big discussion about all the past leaders of their forestry agency and talked all about forest yield and harvesting. Never a mention about forest fires, climate change, water, depressed water, no mention of climate change at all. And when we asked, it's like, well, it's not really a problem. So, Minister of Forestry. The other thing we saw was no water in the rivers. So this is the Volga River, one of the dams. Here's the decreased water there, no water there. And we saw this as a sign of climate change. And the way Tom likes to talk about it is farewell to Mother Volga.
This is true of virtually all the dammed water in Russia and Siberia now.
So their water levels are obviously declining. So we asked, and you can't read that at the top, but the solution is, as Evgeny Burdin said in 2019 on Radio Free Europe, he said, get used to it. The low water situation is aggravated because all the Volga dams are controlled by Rusgirdo state corporation, which is controlled by the federal government. The profits from the generators go to Moscow and the country's economic elite, and they don't care about anything except the profit from generating and selling electricity. The fact that we don't have any fish or clean water is a result of imperial mentality. So imperial means you are just a region that I can grab resources from. You have the oil and gas, and that's the way it is. So get used to it is sort of the theme that we saw as students and visitors. So our conclusion is that the Russian public and government prioritize economic growth and hydrocarbon export. They have a perceived conflict between climate action and economic growth, which shapes their public attitude about climate policies. And the corrupt and incompetent federal government exists primarily to share out the oil profits among the powerful. And this is from Thane Gustafson, The Wheel of Fortune, the book that Tom cited earlier. So, wow, on that cheery note, I'll show you the last picture. This is from a museum in Kazan called Man of the People, Thinking Apocalyptically. And I don't know if you can see this very well, but on the left side, beautiful green farms, a city, people coming up to the Man of the People. And he is saying to the Politburo, which is right here, do not go to war, do not have a nuclear war, because you're supposed to be watching out for the people. And this was a painting in 1990 that we saw at the Kazan Museum. And so we're hoping that the Russian people will understand this eventually and maybe get organized like they did in 1917, but I'm not sure about that. So with that, we will open it up to questions, and we leave you with this slide of books and readings that you might want to consider. So that will be that, and we'll take questions.
Questions? Over here. Okay.
Yeah, no problem. Me.
This microphone. I'll take that.
Hello.
I was wondering about Trump's Board of Peace and Trump's Board of Peace. Well, I guess I just wondered what were your thoughts about, yeah, what all that was about.
A piece that is managed people by various none of the European countries.
All for show.
I don't know,
This
all for what?
all for show.
Show that the big man, right, he has to be in on all the deals. And these are the people that actually support him. It's who he's excluded from that are close by. So
Well, I feel much more peaceful about things because of it.
Thank you.
Um, I'm sorry, thank you. I lost you.
Could you introduce yourself, please? Beth Tribwell. Good God. Beth, did we see you in 1989? Yeah, well, we'll talk later. Okay, never mind.
Other questions?
Other questions or comments about anything else that's happening now?
About the hydroelectric dams, Tom said that that's widespread, they're mostly drawn down. Is that because they're overusing the water for electricity production, or are they just having droughts like we are having? Both.
from the Soviet period, people who produce power in a power station are rewarded for their output. And that's still the case. And particularly when you have a company that owns 3 or 4 of the dams, because they're now not public dams. They're public dams that are interlaced with those that are held by the local oligarch or whatever.
So the question was, why is the water dropping? It's droughts and overproduction, but maybe not use of the electricity. We don't know. Question back there. Oh, and you have to introduce yourself. Thank you, Dick Hoverter, for your question.
My name is Vicki Kilgore. I'm interested if you could comment about Ukraine, considering the Russia interest in Ukraine. It sounds like he has no reason to give up. And what do you see happening and the future of Ukraine?
Russia is losing that war by not gaining it. He's now down to maybe 7 meters at a time and has not been able to take, the Russian army has not been able to, by the way, Russian army is also a Central Asian army that's brought in, and essentially they're not pulling youth from the big towns like Moscow and St. Petersburg and other preferred areas. And so Russia is not winning this war. In my opinion, all along, it has depended really on the United States and what we do, whether or not Ukraine can win the war. It's a stalemate now, and my thought is that it could go badly for the Ukrainians if Trump is as helpful to Putin as he has been before, or there'll be some kind of a ceasefire coming up. But Ukraine is from a position of strength, and the Ukraine is not going to give up on Gdansk and Luhansk, which is now held mostly by the Russians. So it's a terrible, terrible stalemate. 375,000 Ukrainian soldiers dead or casualties, and on the Russian side, 1.3 million, and with much higher casualty death rate. The other thing to think of, I think, when you look at the front lines, and that's have not moved more than a mile in the last 4 or 5 months, is the Ukrainians, if they have the weaponry, if they get the weaponry, the Ukrainians have the defenders ratio, which is 1 to 3. So it's a stalemate, but it could be a stalemate in Putin's favor if in essence the United States does not support Ukraine or our president continues to favor Putin in virtually all of his decisions.
Is there a question in the back? Karen Frazier.
Hi, Karen Fraser, board member. I have an oil question. You talked about how Russia is getting an increased price for oil, which is very helpful to them. Do you think there's anything that could cause the price of oil that Russia would get to go down?
That Russia would get to go down?
Yes, overproduction.
Overproduction.
Overproduction. And so you have to understand that Russia is also part of OPEC. It's OPEC plus. And so when they can send, OPEC can send the prices down by increasing production. That's the major trigger of, in my opinion.
Then it depends on the transportation storage that's all tied up in the Middle East. And no matter what we would do to overproduce, like putting out more from the reserves, all of the nation's reserves of oil, it would still be dependent on what the industry decides to peg the price at, because they have this bottleneck in the Middle East. So even if we had enough oil, they may still not lower it, because of the uncertainty of supply in the Middle East.
Well, I'll make one commentary too on the war now. The war now is beneficial to Russia. Understand that both Russia and China have a security pact with Iran, China gets much of its oil through the Middle East, but at the same time, China can get Russia now from oil again at discount prices. So it's also the price is very tricky because Russia uses the price of oil as best it can as a political whip, and mostly it's still in the hands of OPEC. And they set the prices, but Russia is just very happy about oil being up. Among their cutoff point of making a profit is $50 a barrel. And they're way over that now. How long that will last, nobody knows. But it's beneficial now to them, and they're not doing much at all to support Iran, either Russia or China. And China will get its oil and gas from Russia and other. So China's not going to suffer much from this at all. In fact, my overall estimation is this war is going to weaken us in the Middle East and strengthen Russia and China.
Hi, this has been really useful and enlightening. I'm Carolyn Byerly, and my question is, what's your sense of what the world order is going to look like in a few years? It's obvious that oil, the petro industry is going to be central to whatever happens. And it's the centerpiece of what I see to be the geopolitical situation. But how do you think it's going to sift out with all of the various wars going on now and climate change being what it is? I mean, both of you might want to weigh in on this.
Well, I'm a historian, and I prefer to officiate at the postmortem, but we've sort of adjusted ourselves to the fact that we're going to need oil and gas for a transition up to 30. No, I'm sorry, up to about 50, about 2050. And meantime, what all the treaties prompt the nations to do is begin to wean themselves from oil and gas and put an alternative sources of energy, and that would help with the global warming because of as Bill McKibben said, the sun is forgiving, and it's there pelting down all we need in terms of energy forever. But at the same time, it's not clear. My own feeling about it is it really depends on what the United States does. You know, from taking us out of the area of dealing with global warming into being a petro empire will extend the use of oil and gas well beyond. And we'll see how that happens. But I think that it's going to slow it down, and we're still going to be dealing with this I would say 2 or 3 generations until.
I do have something positive to share. Thank you for, Tom always says the owl of Minerva only flies at dusk. So we never know what's going to happen. And we have students calling him and friends calling him saying, what's going to happen? And so then he says, well, it'll depend on the ego and the personalities of people in charge. But a positive note, I really want to encourage people to read Here Comes the Sun by Bill McKibben. He talks about how much is being done in China in terms of, as I said, solar and wind and battery storage and new technology. And my prediction, and Juana, you've traveled to China many times. Juana is the SPCC International Studies Director, and you've, SPSCC, right? I got it right. Anyway, she's traveled to China many times, and that is a state and corporate managed system. It is not just individual private, it's not just government. And that seems to be working for them with a population of 1 billion something. Of course, there are sacrifices of freedom of speech, perhaps, and et cetera, but don't go there. Here Comes the Sun. Bill McKibben says, here are ways that it is already happening. And the second part of my comment is, with the price of oil so high, people are going to start looking and saying, hey, how much is that EV? And where can I buy a Rivian now that the state legislature just passed a bill allowing them to have show houses around? So we can get probably Chinese imported electric vehicles soon here instead of not. So I'm actually hopeful, and unfortunately the price of gas is high, but maybe that's what we need to be telling people, hey, this is the price. Anyway, that's enough for me. I think there's a question in the back.
Well, just a comment, dialectical disagreement here. I'm less optimistic. And so I guess I would leave you with Herbert Marcuse.
Well, you have to speak into the microphone,
Okay,
sweetie
Herbert
pie.
Marcuse. Anybody remember Herbert Marcuse, a German philosopher, really, really quite amazing from the Frankfurt School. During the 60s, I was, late 60s, I was a professor at SUNY at Buffalo, and we were involved in another anti-war movement then at that time. And Herbert Marcuse, which was one of the leading philosophers of the world at the time, came through and gave a presentation. And at the end, a young woman stood up, as she should, and said, well, Professor Marcuse, can't you be any more positive about the future? And he got this big grin on his face, and he had this thick Frankfurtian German accent. And he said, well, one of two things. Either things will get worse or there'll be a catastrophe.
Thank you for sharing. Anthony has a question in the back.
Anthony Hempstead. Two questions, if I may. First off, on Russia and oil. What do you think the impact is going to be of the Ukrainian tactic of attacking Russian oil infrastructure? Is that going to be enough to throttle back Russia's ability to take advantage of being able to access oil markets again right now? And then second question, Tom, you mentioned you thought it was a mistake that NATO expanded to the borders of Belarus. Somewhat concerned on that, and would love your opinion on if NATO didn't expand to include those countries, what would have been the impact on the Baltics, for instance? I mean, I would see those as potentially being like Georgia if they weren't in NATO. Okay, thanks.
That's a great question, and I changed my mind on that. No, that's all I can say is that that was very flip at the time. But as it turns out, you know, again, a historian can't project how it turns out is they absolutely need NATO, and NATO, I should remind people, is a defensive. It is a defensive treaty group, and not one that should be called upon to open the waterways through the Gulf of Hormuz. But again, I think one of the reasons I'm not entirely hopeful about the future, my guess is after attacking the Europeans once again gratuitously, that Trump is going to move to get out of NATO. And there are good things about that and bad things. But Europe is not ready yet to deal with this war on its own and support. And that's why I've argued for years that that what Trump does is the key factor here, and the side he takes is the key factor. And in my opinion, he's taken the side of Putin. Hey.
Hello. Oh, this is interesting. Hello. I have a related question. My name's John Erickson. I have a related question. I think you said something about Trump being interested in his own oil empire or an international oil empire, and I'm interested in potential, whether there's potential competition with Putin's oil power, or whether, I mean, there's Texas, you know, which is heavy oil. There's a lot of American oil, and I don't imagine Trump being the wizard of geopolitics like other people think. But so what is is there a potential for competition, or is it more collaboration on a profitable oil business?
I guess is the latter. And when I say that Trump is building a petro empire, what's Venezuela about anyway? And he wants to have the same kind of power over gas and oil